That's awesome. Hey students, this is Mrs. Angel. I'm here. This gentleman is probably one of my absolute favorite photographers that I work with here in town. He's also multi-talented. Very excited to talk with him. Please welcome Rob Slaven.
Hello.
Hey Rob. So in the world of, performance, etc., what would you say your job title is, if you could give yourself, identify as some of the cool things you do?
A title is tricky because at the end of the day, I will just sort of walk around and hunt whatever happens to be going on. I think in the theater community, I'm mostly referred to as a production photographer, just trying to capture those moments. I like to see the entire production process because it's such a rich one that, from those very first, meet and greet of, hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm going to be working with you for the next 3 months to that point where they're on stage that actually puts them together. So that whole life cycle of the process. So.
And I think you capture that so interesting visually, where I've seen some of the photos you posted of the audition. So going from the audition to full lights, full costume, full performance phase, I do think that capturing that cycle looks really cool.
Well, I hope that doing that also gives us because they're putting in a lot of work if you look at it. So I've had a lot of feedback from people that indicate they really appreciate the fact that they got to see all that, because they wouldn't normally. You never get to see yourself at auditions typically.
Right.
You don't have that. So having, here's the 4 months I spent working on this, and I can actually see and have these memories that otherwise we're just kind of flushed into the world. So
that's great. So what is one of your other things that you do? I know you do 100 bazillion things, but
right now my other passion is woodworking. Just kind of making anything that people come to me and say, I'd like to have this, trying to figure out how to do it on a reasonable budget. In the past, I've done Amazon reviews, done a lot of sort of book reviews, and I was very literary for a period of time. At the end of the day, I want to end up at the end of my life having done everything I can think of without reservation. So it's been really fun to just kind of go from flower to flower and see what the world has to offer.
That's really cool. So I love that idea that you didn't have to pick one thing and just stick with it.
I think that's increasingly the case. Back in the old days, that you were an accountant and that's all you did. But nowadays with the internet, you can do anything. You can pick up a hobby and go off and do. If you want to be a submarine mechanic, you can go off and research that to the point where you know enough to walk in and do some of that work. So it's the democratization of the world in many ways.
So I saw that you specifically were helping with the set build for Footlight when they did. What were they doing? Ragtime?
I did most of the work I did with set design was for Ragtime. I've kind of petered off since then just because I have other projects going on. But
yeah,
that was a great experience and gave me a perspective on the theater that I never would have expected to have. So,
So how did you learn how to work with tools and such?
Really, my dad was a woodworker. He didn't really let me out in the shop very much, but between watching my dad sometimes and PBS, you can between This Old House and Roy Underhill, you can pick up a lot and just sort of intuitively figure out how not to cut your hand off. Really, that is the most important. It's how to keep all of your fingers attached so that.
Do you have a particular type of wood that you enjoy working with?
I'm a cheapskate at heart, so yeah. I love a nice, simple pine. It's renewable, it's soft, it's easy to work with, it's easy to find in a variety of sizes, shapes, whatever. And if you mess up, it's not a big deal. You go out, spend another $4 and get it again. You can do almost anything with it. Just with a little patience. So
Uh-huh. I'm always amazed by people who like they can look at it and smell and be like, oh, this is cedar obviously because it has a smell, but they're like, oh, this is redwood. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's wood. But I mean, obviously it's different. But yes, I love cheapskates. I am also a cheapskate at heart.
I'm not a wood connoisseur. I know pine, redwood, and cedar, and everything else is just hard.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your photography. So tell me about, how did you learn how to use a camera?
When I was in high school, I took a class. This is back in the days of film, so we had
Uh-huh.
to go off into the light room and actually develop it. But really, it's just trial and error, especially nowadays with digital. I mean,
Hmm.
you can go off and shoot for 8 hours, not cost yourself anything, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then go back out and do it again.
Hmm.
Um, so really, I'm very much a trial and error guy with most things, and so just iteration. You go out, you do it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. You
Hmm.
learn, you go out, do it again. So,
What kind of different events have you photographed?
well, I started out in, believe it or not, in comedy clubs. Really, that was my
Really?
first inclusion into performance photography. I managed to, if I don't know if you're familiar, but there used to be a comedy club on the north side, Morty's Comedy Club. I,
Was it the one that used to be like in a taco restaurant, a Mexican restaurant?
and
Yes.
the old Don Pablo's, and I
Yes.
used to get the owners to let me come in and shoot, and I just kind of camped myself out there for every show, and just again just iterated for hours and hours and hours, and I was there for probably 2 years solid before they closed, which is very sad. But you have to have a Panera Bread. But that's what's in there now. But um, and that's kind of where I started out, and just kind of diversified and took my portfolio and said, hey, can I shoot some pictures for you? Here's what I've shot before, and just kind of wheedle my way up the ladder. So
Hmm. What other kind of events have you shot?
I've shot a lot of stuff with the Palladium,
Hmm.
musical acts, all the way down to like charity events for kids, a few sporting events. Apparently, that's very popular. It's hard to get into. It's
Hmm.
hard to wheel yourself into professional sporting events, but I've shot a couple.
Hmm.
Um, but a little bit of everything. My motto on my Facebook page is, "I will shoot anything that moves."
Do you have a particular art form that you prefer to shoot?
I, I really do prefer the theater, just because of the fact that there's so much variety of what's going on. You can go to the comedy club, you're going to get a lot of profile, expression, action shots,
Hmm.
but in the theater you can get expression, you can get dance, you can get candid moments of emotion from people. I mean, it really is it's everything of that appears in real life on the stage,
Hmm.
and there's never a boring moment. So,
That's awesome. Do you tell me? Okay, so obviously there's differences in lightings from like a rock and roll concert versus like ragtime. How does that affect your shooting?
um, it's a wild ride sometimes. You can go to a rock show, shoot for 3 hours from the pits, and come home with almost nothing
Um,
because the lighting is so off. But there are other times where you come back with the most amazing, stunning. It is very much potluck,
mhm.
and because of the way that the press interaction works at rock shows, you only get 3 songs typically, and
Oh,
then
really? Tell me,
so it
tell me about that. I'm not familiar with that at all.
um it's a policy, I guess, of the acts.
Hmm.
It's not 100% clear why they have their rule. The old sort of cynical view is that they don't want to let shots of them that are all sweaty. So they
Oh.
want to be up there when they're fresh and they're clean and they look crisp.
Hmm.
And also, I think that they don't want to give away stuff.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
act. So they front load the stuff that they want to be photographed, and then tell you to go away, so they can have a show just for the audience that isn't immortalized. So
Although I'd have to say, like, the sweaty shots for me are just so intense when they're like sweaty, dripping sweat, and like intensely into it.
agree, especially for a heavy metal band,
Mhm.
that those that sound is not accidental. They really work for it. So it's
Uh-huh. That's great. So that lighting can be just more intense, and then you have a really short time frame. Tell me about, like, because I know you've shot shows for me. I've seen you shoot shows at the White Rabbit. So, like, when you walk into, and like, shows where you're just coming in to do like a one night thing rather than like like ragtime, or you kind of following the whole process. What's your approach when you come in? Like, what do you think about?
um it's a complicated. You mentioned the White Rabbit, and that's a tricky one, because one of my own primary thing drivers is to not get in the way, because I'm there to document, but it'd be very easy to get in. A lot of photographers do. I mean, they're up there clicking away and impeding the audience.
Mhm.
So it's really a few things. One is to just stay out of the way.
Mhm.
As I say, if you're going to get in the way, then don't bother with the shot, because people pay to be there. I mean, so but um, depending on how crowded it is, figuring out how much you can move, because
Mhm.
I've been to a lot of shows where if you get there 2 hours early, you can camp yourself right up front, but if you leave, you're done.
Uh-huh.
So you have to pick that spot, and trying to figure out, almost to the point of, okay, is the lead singer left-handed or right-handed, because he's going to have the mic in
Uh-huh.
this hand. And if you get the shot from over here, you're going to have mostly mic as opposed to here, and I'm not going to be able to move back and forth.
Mhm.
And what are the people going to do? So it's an intense calculus sometimes, trying to get the exact right shot, and sometimes you just don't.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes you get what you get.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you walk into the space, you kind of see, where can I be unobtrusive? Do you ever there's a specific example I want to talk about where you were shooting one of my shows, and you felt like, I feel like you said JC Penney catalog. Like, you felt like the shots you were doing were like a JC Penney
mhm.
catalog. Does that sound familiar?
It does, because it's something I often say. Because I don't want to get a shot that looks like someone staged it. I want something that has real intensity and emotion. And really, it's uh, most people say photography, but as far as I'm concerned, it's less photography than it is hunting. You're
Hunting.
looking at the exact right instant. One example I remember from one of your recent shows with the Adams Family
Yes.
was he was on the rack, and Wednesday, pulled, and that reaction of visceral, not really being stretched to death, but that reaction as if, and that was one of the shots for me that said, okay, this is what I came here for. Not,
Uh-huh.
not the, here's the whole cast, on the stage. I want those intimate moments that maybe not everybody got to see. Something that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
hope is, take a picture that someone who went to the show looks at and said, I didn't even see that. That's
Uh-huh.
the ultimate, and especially for the performers, because a lot of the performers don't get to see everything because they're backstage. So,
Yeah, and that's what I have to say, like, looking at things, I'm like, "Oh, that's so pretty." Like, I never get to see this, especially if I do a show where I am, like, stage managing from backstage, and then you don't get to see it from out front.
mhm.
It's really nice. So, do you tell me about, like, especially when you walk into something cold, are you just kind of, like, trying to be, like, aware of what's happening? Like, you're just sort of observing the prey that's coming in front of you and then catch it?
I wish I could describe the process to you in more detail, but at a certain level, it just becomes instinctual.
Yeah.
You just, it is a full body, full mind experience, trying to figure out, okay, the action looks like it's kind of heading in this direction. I need to shift the stage left. Otherwise, I'm going to miss this. And especially if you've never seen for the theater, especially, that's why it's so important to get into rehearsal, so you know
Yeah.
Shoot- Shooting a theatrical performance absolutely cold is bananas, because you're constantly shifting around trying to figure out, all while trying to not get in the way.
Right.
So
Do you see that is there a difference between the results you get from shooting a rehearsal versus shooting a live performance? Because I mean, like a performance versus a rehearsal, because you have more room to move around. But do you see a difference in the actors' like intensity at all? Is that even a factor?
having watched the show from beginning, and there is the, there are certain points during the production process when everyone is at their peak, like the first time they hit the stage for real, and they're no longer in the back of the gym somewhere, and they realize people are gonna be looking at me, and that is one peak of activity. And then after they've done it a few times, it kind of tapers off. People calm down. First time that they're in costumes is a peak for them, because it becomes more and more real. The last rehearsal is usually the best. If there's a preview night, things tend to go a little bit differently, just because there's adrenaline, there's people here. Then that first real performance is usually the best. If it's a long set of performances, there's a lull in the middle where people kind of relax a little bit, and then the last show. Unfortunately, I don't usually get to shoot the last show, but from having seen them, that is the pinnacle, where they're not only practiced, that they know their parts by heart, but they also have that inner realization that this 4-month journey is at an end. So there is a roller coaster that you can see on people's faces.
That's really neat. I've never thought of that from a visual standpoint, but it's 100% true. I mean, you could feel that backstage. You can feel the energy of you could feel the energy, but it translates visually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything you feel, I can see. If I'm looking at the right place at the right time. So
that's really cool.
That might be mildly terrifying to some people.
Mildly terrifying. Are you on whatever are you on a computer or device? Would it be easy for you to show us around your shop, or is that going to be too difficult?
It's not, probably not convenient at this exact juncture.
Absolutely.
I'm not even sure. Currently, my online presence is sort of vague anyway. So
it's totally fine. Let's go back to your woodworking. What kinds of things do you enjoy making?
I'm an unusual person from a woodworking perspective, in that I don't follow anyone else's plans. I am fairly intuitive in that I start out with a general idea of what I want, and then I just kind of wheedle my way towards whatever that happens to be. So really, the only thing that I lack most of the time is a purpose, because my house is full at this point, so I don't have any more purpose there. But really, whatever someone comes to me and says, I want this, is usually the most, because again, it's all about the process and the intuition of figuring out, okay, this connects to this connects to this, and figure out how to do that really drives me personally. So the answer to the question is whatever someone wants and will find useful is what I'm most interested in. So
I like the elevated dog feeding bowls that you've made. I think those are real cool.
The dog likes them too. So
what kind of dog do you have?
She's a pit bull lab mix, we think.
Right.
So she's the sweetest thing in the universe. So.
Aww. So I asked you to think of a interesting word. Hey students, this is our interesting word section. So did you pick a word?
I am quite a word connoisseur, so I have many words, but my favorite words are those which are so specific that you would think there was not a word for that. My example to that is avuncular.
Oh yes, like an uncle.
Or pertaining to an uncle. And so the next time that you see your uncle, you can call him avuncular and see if he
That's Avunucular, avuncular.
Sounds about right. I'm
Okay.
terrible.
That's great. So last question, Rob. And it's funny, we were chatting before we started recording about how this quarantine is an introvert's dream. Um, and you're like, this is the correct amount of distance we should all be from each other. So, saying that we're out of quarantine, what would you do with $1 million? Like, ridiculous, whatever you want to do. What would you do with $1 million?
Yeah, I'm pretty boring, so I would I would likely just save it and invest it, and at some point when I could retire and not have to work, I could dedicate myself to, a few causes. The theater would be great. It'd be
Yeah.
amazing to just follow the theater all the time and help promote, those people.
Hmm.
And also, I think making furniture for people who can't afford it, because furniture is vastly overpriced. It'd be great to be able to just, you know, put together a bed for someone who doesn't have it and say, "Here's a bed. Here you go. Take it away. Enjoy."
That's great.
So,
That's
so
super
that's
awesome. Yay. And you're not boring. You're awesome. Well, I mean, I think I find you very, very interesting, but I understand the self. I don't know. I'm going to start rambling now. But that's what I wanted to talk about. So thank you so much for your time, Rob. I really appreciate you. All
it's my pleasure.
right.